Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Para, for the invitation, which I appreciate very much. And really happy to be here. By the way, I was born in Brno, so coming back home, basically. And today I wanted to share a little bit of our work, our practice, and hello, and also maybe some news, and maybe also share, try to make this also sort of shared inquiry or a little bit of a debate, discussion of what we can do all together to build better worlds. But first of all, my question: do you speak to plants? I know this is a bit of a random question. But you do?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Anyone care to elaborate?
Anyone what?
Care to elaborate? Do you want to?
If I need to take something, I'm asking for permission. So if I'm like picking fruits or if I'm like collecting sap from tree, I'm asking if it's okay. But like, if it's not, I don't know if I would get the mess. I'm trying, but like,
Yeah. Of course. Anyone else?
Yeah, when there's something wrong, I talk more. So I can give her some, or I can some energy.
Yeah.
I kind of praise my plants when they grow nicely.
Yeah, I do the same.
Yeah?
Really?
Yeah. Like, oh my god, you're so cute today.
So I'm basically speaking to the converted, right? I'm speaking to people who know that there is much more to our relationships, plant-human relationships, but obviously like more than human worlds. I'm just going to quickly share a little bit of our practice with Haenke and then move on towards free radicals, which is something that we've been working on since 3 years now, almost 3 years. Obviously, there will be some bits that I'm pretty sure that you guys know already, so I'm probably going to skip that. Or maybe we can just debate this as well, because you have never enough of these discussions and exchanges, especially with people who know. So just a little bit of our practice. It's been almost 10 years since we set up Haenke. I'm going to speak about that and why also a bit later. But yeah, as Bara was saying, that I think my background is in arts and culture. I entered this world as a musician, performer, and then I moved on to the sort of management side. So I was working in London in a huge artist agency, trying to arrange concerts and tours for very famous classical opera stars and classical musicians. And then, as Bara was mentioning, my partner Julien, he is a French ethnobotanist, pharmacist, who also basically he focuses on plants and explores the world of plants through research rooted in ethnobotany, ethnopharmacology, pharmacognosy, and all these different disciplines. And I've been together for a very long time, and at some point we decided that we wanted to explore, extend our knowledge. So we were both at the same time accepted to a master's degree in London, in the UK, and then we were living not far from Columbia Road, which is a very famous market, especially on the weekends. There's lots of people, but also lots of plants. And so we were listening to the hustle and bustle that was going on in there as well. But obviously, as we were drinking the pints of beer, etc., we were just thinking, okay, how can we actually, first of all, how can we work together? But there's so much to discover also within the plant world that stays so closed off to sort of wider public. It also. There was this one moment when Julien came from a scientific conference in Córdoba, and he said, well, so many amazing ideas, so many inspiring projects, and people who work on so many great things, but it stays within the academia. And, we thought, okay, so how about we try to champion these ideas and thoughts and more than human worlds, through projects that are rooted in arts and culture. So this is how Haenke was born. This is our first installation at the National Theatre Square in Prague. Almost 1,000 plants. Imagine it was like horrible rain, and you're supposed to set this up, at like one of the most exposed squares in Prague. It was great fun. Lasted for about 8 weeks, and it's the point was within these. Oh, well, I guess maybe better. You had these like ornamental grasses, and in between the grasses, we hid medicinal plants. So through the labyrinth, you could walk, take some time, and observe, and also learn a little bit about the plants that were specifically chosen for somehow being related to medicinal plants. So we did this. This is something that happened in Brno many years ago, actually, as well. Back when Praha Forum pro Architekturu and Media was still around, and we were invited to imagine. It was like this amazing time when there was this whole talk about like millennials killing stuff, and one of the things were like, oh, they're obsessed with houseplants because they can't really afford to have kids or buy a house, etc. Whatever you think about this right now, I think there's a really sort of interesting vacuum that was happening around that time. So what we did is small projects we created together with the collective of architects, Final back then, that was in Brno. So yeah, we just took this topic of houseplants and explored, like basically recreated a room of a typical millennial in that. So yeah, you could walk around that, and also we had this. I don't know if you can see this on the on the central photo. Like I am a kid of 90s, right? And we used to have like posters of like bands. So we asked a few like plant-fluencers that were really famous on Instagram at the time to send us pictures, and then so we like put them on the wall. It's fun. And then I think we did kind of gain a little bit of notoriety, and a lot of brands and designers and architects started coming up to us and thinking, okay, well, how can we work together? How can we collaborate together? And it was really, I think, at first, like, it was nice, obviously very exciting, but at the same time, and the more and more we were kind of getting into this sort of way, we realized that all of this was, by, I would say, majority of people, was taken as a decoration or something that was supposed to serve in some way, or be nice, be there, and I'm not saying, well, ESCAP for the change, they were actually really understanding to the concepts that we had, but I think, like more and more, I think that we started really kind of realizing that the perception of plants in majority society is that of decoration, obviously, and resource. And if we're talking about decoration and interior and architecture, etc., there's a whole lot of. I do believe in, obviously, the power of creativity and power of like creative thought and people who work in these sectors as well. But I think that there's still a way to go, and we need always to kind of persuade and show that plants are not just decoration. Obviously, all this. This actually also stems from another experience that we had for 4 years. I think we were running a studio in Prague. First of all, we were hosting workshops, and they were mainly around phytotherapy as well. How to make your medicinal plant cream, etc. It was really fun, and then I'm not going to go much into details, but basically what happened that we started doing some more like plant swaps and focusing more also interior plants as well. so this kind of urban gardening, you know, and like whenever you see an interior plant as well, you know, these are also plants that are somehow rooted out of its original context, because, you know, most of them, they are home in tropical rainforest, or, you know, somewhere completely different and not supposed to be in Prague or elsewhere, or grown in you know, Dutch or wherever huge greenhouses. So like the more we were kind of digging into all these topics, the more we realized how, first of all, absolutely unsustainable all this kind of gardening world is, and how you know, what can we do for that as well. So how to practice, you know, basically, and also on the premise of like how to, you know, what is actually sustainability? What does it actually mean? Like people kind of, you know, wave in front of your face with like so many, oh, we have green transition and circular economy and zero waste and then this and that, but like what does it actually mean, and do we actually practice it? Also, mind you, this was before, obviously, you know, like the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, etc. So like the world was kind of a different place back then as well. Right now, I think the conversation is completely different, obviously, and I'm gonna go into that a bit later. So yeah, and out of this, I think was born a book as well, where, yeah, you know, like we kind of go through our experience at, like, you know, our take at like urban gardening, and how do we actually, you know. But basically, the bottom line was that, you know, before we even discuss something like sustainable development or green transition or, you know, anything like that, we completely need to shift perspective on how we view plants and obviously other different forms of life that inhabit this planet. Because we somehow, you know, closed the studio and then moved on back to did some other projects, mainly moved from being like very kind of Czech-based more towards France as well, thanks to Julien, who now has a position in Montpellier in France. So this is, for instance, another project that I think, I don't know how, it somehow stayed with me. It was just really something that, you know, when people like say, what radicalized you about this? Partly, and I guess, obviously, you know, inspired by like Esther Krumbachova's aesthetics as well. I think the context of this was vector-borne diseases. So I don't know how much you guys are familiar with the topic, but basically vector-borne diseases are malaria, are dengue fever, etc. Diseases that we have, luckily, almost no notion of. But that's probably very much likely about to change, because as temperatures rise, also the vectors, the mosquitoes, go up and up and up. They also, by the way, like to travel in tires. They like to also kind of create their homes in discarded truck tires. So, like, you know, with the entire kind of economy going basically up on trucks, it just goes up. But when you look at any sort of officially approved, and I'm not saying they're not right, but if you look at officially approved cures, or like how to face this problem, what mostly states, or what mostly is championed, is the use of DDT. So once again, some substance which is extremely toxic has been developed as a response, you know, during the First World War. I'm going to talk about that. It's like a huge topic, and yet still, you know, we have lots of traditional knowledge all over the world that explore and tackle vector-borne diseases through plants. So we wanted to, through this project, you know, we hosted a performative dinner in the middle of an Académie du Climat, which is this kind of like center for ecology in the middle of Paris, and, you know, we pretended that this dinner was not only for us humans but also for the mosquitoes, that maybe somehow could be, you know, cured. And if not cured, then, you know, how can we actually like go all together sort of more than human ways? How, you know, do we have to, you know, use these absolutely toxic substances in order to create what, you know, yeah. this is another thing, and we're lucky to hold an exhibition in the Czech Center in Paris, where we've invited with Wojciech Veškerna to sort of put in perspective his photos, and also some research that was going on back then in the university, at the Faculty of Pharmacy in Paris. So what you could see was this kind of documentary photography plants that we obtained, probably were living with us for 10 days, that were from the botanical garden of the Faculty of Pharmacy, and then obviously the research that was there to create this sort of ecosystem within the Janáček Hall to show that, again, it's not a decoration, but these are some real living beings that deserve our attention much more. I always do this because I think that this is really interesting, but again, I guess, you guys, I don't need to, obviously, 1 second. If you say, if I ask you what brands these are, I'm pretty sure you won't take, more than like a fraction of a second. If I ask you what plants are these, most of the people, we stop here for about 5 minutes explaining one by one what these plants are. Do you want to?
Rubber plant.
Yes.
This one.
Actually, I chose these ones as well because they all have like a really interesting history, right? Or like a really interesting, story basically, and of like human-plant relationships as well. So the rubber plant obviously is something that I'm probably going to speak about this also later. Like these living bridges in the Indian, I think it's northeast of India. They have these living bridges that are formed with these plants. Vernacular architecture, amazing. This one is barvínek in Czech. I'm gonna remember the name, but Madagascar periwinkle. It's used. It has a molecule or two molecules, vincristin and vimblastin, which are used to tackle Hodgkin lymphoma, basically a form of cancer. This one is coffee, which I think we all appreciate in one way or another, and this is papaya. The leaves of which are again used against malaria or decoction, obviously, in Cameroonian vernacular medicine. So when we speak about nature, most of us, I think, exactly like you want to get out of nature, and you think that. I guess for everybody, nature or the notion of nature is something completely different. Somebody wants to escape to a park, but then again, like our parks, the nature. I think this would be also a topic to discuss. But I wanted to bring you to the topic of plant blindness, or in different other iterations, the definition of the term, which basically means that. That was a topic. It was a concept coined, or the expression was coined by James H. Wonderstein and Elizabeth Schlussler, American biologists that basically outlined this concept of, I guess, an ordinary human would probably pass many of these plants or trees or different forms of life, not knowing what they are, not noticing the structure, the texture of the leaves, and not let alone the traditional uses, or like what sort of collaboration can bring. But obviously, as we know, plants have brought us not only materials, medicine, architecture, musical instruments, basically everything that you can see we're surrounded by plants, but obviously the ability to breathe as well. And I think that's always something that we don't forget that, but it is really nice to maybe remember that. I think that I'm talking to somebody who already knows, so I'm just going to skip this quickly because we do need to mention this, but at the same time, it is something that has been with us ever since Columbus steps onto the island of Guarani, which has obviously shaped the very nature of our relationship between plants and obviously different other ecosystems. Slightly less good quality picture, but I think that this one illustrates very well, the sort of meeting of the two worlds. And again, not to sort of romanticize indigenous knowledge or indigenous communities, but I think that even in ecosystems or contexts such as the Czech one, we very often we say, oh, we have nothing to do with colonization, right? Because we didn't have any colonies. That's probably not very correct, and it obviously shaped much of how sort of today contemporary world looks like as well. This is Rome in about 1620, and as I was mentioning, back then Rome was place, ridden with mosquitoes. There was malaria. There was lots of malaria actually in Rome, and the story goes that Jesuits went to Peru and they somehow learned magically that the bark of a tree produces quinine, which you can see here, the sort of dried bark, and that is possible. And this bark makes it possible to get rid of the fevers. What followed is what Samer Boumediene mentions in his book Colonization of Knowledge. A whole sort of a whole completely new yet omnipresent in today's world notion that plants are here as a resource to take. Who owns nature, right? Is this Spanish colonizers or very recommended. I think the book exists in English, but even in French, it's totally worth learning French for that book. So apart from Samer Boumediene, I think that very often you will hear about Londa Schiebinger, who is another scholar and a person who dedicates and has dedicated her life in many ways to exploring the many ways historically that have sort of shaped the colonial trade in the context of plants. She talks about green gold as something that plants were basically back then, spices and different materials, right? It's just extremely fascinating, and I think if you read the book, and obviously thanks to other also resources, fascinating is probably not a good word, but yes, let's just say that it is extremely, just extremely, let's just use the word fascinating in the negative sense, that to what extent the French, the Spanish, the British have, or the colonial powers, let's say, have used quinine and the story of the Peruvian bark plant in their political advances as well. This is how the bark was being used or dried in India, because then the quinine bark was somehow smuggled to the British colonies in India, and then in India, this. And this is Yo-Yo Tu, who is credited with being the only Nobel Prize winner who won the Nobel Prize for a discovery of a new medicine based on plants. So if you go to, I think it was 2015, Yo-Yo Tu, a Chinese researcher, because this gave us quinine, right? But somehow also we had the resistance over time. I think that the sort of strength has, like, we've developed resistance, so there was another sort of will to figure out different other ways how to cure malaria and different other vector-borne diseases. So Yo-Yo too, she went through texts of 2,000 years old Chinese medicine, and she discovered, or having analyzed lots of these texts, she basically noticed that there was Artemisia who also demonstrated potential cure for malaria. So this is how artemisinin was then later developed or isolated as a molecule. But these are all other stories. I think that, again, something I don't. It's just also very extremely relevant in contemporary world, right? Because Maria Sibylla Meriam, Dutch entrepreneur, painter, who also ventured into the Dutch colony of Suriname, where she registered really, really horribly painful stories of slaves basically drinking a decoction of a certain peacock flower, so that they don't need to, so that their children not need to become slaves like they are. And funnily enough, all this plant actually then made it to Europe as an ornamental plant, but the use, the sort of abortifacient's use was never really registered in its sort of European knowledge. So yeah, this is also something that is also important to maybe mention, is that when from the colonies the plants were traveling back to Europe for whichever reason necessary or possible, very often they were there was a lot of plants that just didn't make it because the travel was really long, and obviously all these possible many ways that can go wrong, until mid 19th century, where the Wardian case was developed, which just was these like miniature versions of glasshouses that basically made it absolutely, this was this huge revolution in transporting plants from the colonies to Europe. And yes, the Czechs, they were not excused from this. You can look into our very own name, which is something that we need to own as well, and we need to tackle this. So, just quickly, Tadeusz Haenke is this figure that is really, first of all, he's sort of half forgotten, right? So like you have his bust on the National Museum sort of back rear side, but if you ask ordinary Czech people, okay, do you know who Tadeusz Haenke was? Most of the people would tell you probably not. This is not true in Bolivia or in Chile and Peru, in places in Latin America where he did indeed leave a huge sort of mark. Especially, he is credited with the discovery, again, of Victoria Amazonica, which is the largest water lily in the world, which he described in around 1810. But he was also a very avid musician. Pardon, it's something that I would today I would call an event manager, because he was hosting a lot of concerts in his residence in Cochabamba in Bolivia. What is not mentioned very often is that he was also a very skilled entrepreneur, right? So like as part of, like aside of his sort of scientific career, for which he currently is most revered, he's also very much, he had like a very much of an entrepreneurial sort of spirit as well. So he was experimenting with loads of different innovations at that time, such as ammunition, but he was also somehow involved in like the trade between the Czech glass industry, which was still up and running at that time, from places like Nový Vod to Latin America. So it's an extremely complicated story of somebody who was obviously very much involved in these colonial expeditions, but also thanks to people like that, we now have a historical description of what plants were actually part of those ecosystems back when he was alive, because these plants no longer exist in there, right? So like there is a lot of irony actually that is there, and this is also something that we're kind of moving on to explore in our next project. But today's talk is supposed to be about intelligence, right? And like conspiring with plants. So when you were mentioning the plants and you talk to plants, I'm pretty sure you also know plant anthropocene. You probably know also Natasha Myers. If not, then I invite you to read. I think there are many versions as well, but my favorite, well, ex-Mold magazine, because it no longer publishes on a regular basis, but if you go to Mold magazine, you can also read How to Grow a Livable World. Plant anthropocene is a term coined by Canadian scholar Natasha Myers, who basically outlines what has to happen so that we do have a livable world here as well. I wanted to just like focus on this. When I was mentioning the indigenous knowledge, obviously, there is another sort of stream, let's say, because, for instance, again, like talking about medicine, for instance, up until, let's say, 19th century, every single medicine was based on plants, because there was no synthetic or so-called modern medicine. And that changed, obviously, with the sort of synthetic revolution, if you will. And so the knowledge about plants has gradually completely wind down from the sort of societal awareness. It is only now that we begin to sort of examine what plants actually are as beings. One of the people that you may probably know is Stefano Mancuso, who is an Italian plant neurobiologist, who I think has made a lot of noise, if you wish, in let's say, past couple of years at least, by suggesting or like being, on the forefront of claiming that basically there is such a thing as plant intelligence, which apparently in circles, that kind of deal with sort of Western scientific knowledge systems, it is something extremely controversial to argue, right? So we have intelligence, that's for sure, and then maybe animals also have intelligence, but do plants have intelligence? So there is a whole sort of volume of research being done, not only obviously with Stefano Mancuso, but others. I wanted to just bring you to one little fraction of all this. When you say, very often you say, oh, plants cannot move because they're rooted in soil, right? So like they need to figure out different other ways how to, bring energy, how to defend themselves, how to communicate, etc. And once you've kind of digged into all these topics, it is just so extremely fascinating and very, very inspiring. So you have such a thing as volatile organic compounds, for instance, that are being emitted by plants. And this could also be a way of communicating, a way of defense, many, many ways. You have also volatile organic compounds that are being sort of emitted by us humans that are not very healthy, but that's, I guess, for another session. But obviously, so there is this always this sort of, this fight between Western scientific thought and what it represents also in the context of the colonial histories that we all share, and the indigenous wisdoms that are somehow forgotten, but are still to this day extremely important. I wanted to also say that, through the work of Haenke, or like of Haenke as in like our collective, we realized, and I'm going to be using the phrase of internet, which is also in a way more than human. So the more we were digging into, okay, let's just do something with plants and for plants, the more I was getting these, smirks like, okay, so, but first of all, how are you gonna live? How are you gonna make money? That was one thing. And another one was, but like, I felt like as if the more I was discussing this in public, the more people would look at me as if, I was this kind of, just really a weirdo, basically, that didn't really understand the modern world, right? What is it to claim that you communicate with plants? How? Yet, here we go. Also, we are at a time when we are facing conservative backlash. We are facing, something that, as I was mentioning, 6 years ago was a completely normal, usual conversation. Now we're getting into a moment in which, this just no longer is sufficient, right? We need to think about different other ways how to grow livable worlds, or how to build really better futures in order to kind of sustain ourselves, but also to maybe survive even. And so when we are talking about topics like green transition or circular economy or sustainability or regenerative ecosystems, etc., I think that the thought and the initial idea is that we really have not grasped what plants are. I guess. Maybe we just got it wrong somewhere along the way. We just don't understand it. And we also think that this is just not plants, right? It's not just plants. This is ice cream. Well, it's plants technically as well. But that there are so many other forms of life that deserve to be put into, or that they deserve to be somehow championed in the sort of just way, right? Again, yes, Freud of the internet. Not just plants. I'm pretty sure you've heard this. In one single teaspoon of soil, you have more microbiomes or more forms of life than like in I remember this very famous thing. Anyway, it's just extremely important that we do somehow rehabilitate within the majority. I would like to argue that within the sort of majority society, right? Because it's one thing to be discussing this all together, but another thing is to go out and speak to the people who really, I don't want to say have no idea, but actually have who probably see the world in a different way. Let's put it this way. But we really think it is important, because otherwise things might get even worse, which we don't want. And so basically what we did with this other project that I want to discuss for the rest of this talk is free radicals. And we thought, okay, so how about free radicals is a molecule. Again, we borrowed a term from pharmacy. Free radicals is a term that basically means molecules which are very harmful to human health. You can have more free radicals if you smoke, drink lots of alcohol, you're loads of under stress, you eat really unhealthily, you don't really do any sports, you are exposed to air pollution, all these things, they create sort of so-called free radicals in your body. And it's only through consuming somehow or being exposed to antioxidants that you can actually find in many plants, coffee, blueberries, chocolate, but also Japanese knotweed, which is currently being labeled as an invasive species, and all sorts of other different plants, green tea. So for free radicals, we actually thought, okay, so how about we somehow reimagine this, and we think of the plants as free radicals, as the plants that are somehow, those that kind of can help us make better futures by somehow conspiring as well with humans and different other species. Mm-hmm. Going back to people who have helped shape our research, but also obviously the project in itself, and the sort of modern contemporary thought, I guess it really goes without saying that we have to obviously begin with those that kind of helped shape this entire kind of field of inquiry. Donna Haraway, Anna Singh, Natasha Myers, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Monica Galliano, Susan Simard. I guess I don't need to explain more about that. But it goes, yes, obviously, there's a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of thinking about how we can actually move things. Another thing, however, is something that I wanted to also make a short explanation. We as artists or people who are somehow oscillating around the creative and cultural sectors, this is an extremely precarious and difficult field to work in. Yet we have, the arts and culture have potential to really spearhead social change. I don't think I need to kind of mention examples because we all know. Hopefully things will get better also on the governmental level, but yes, that's something to be put aside. This is something that I think I care really about deeply, because obviously we are also the ones who are being kind of pushed to, so have you traveled by plane? Why? You're not really sustainable, right? So your practice is horrible because, you don't practice this kind of, you preach something and then you do something else as well. But I think that, I think we can all collectively agree that, yes, arts and culture can indeed inspire many, many, many beautiful things and inspire change in our society. And it is not really upon the individual to be blamed for their actions if the system is crooked and doesn't really work, right? So we decided to create a toolkit. Again, what is a toolkit, would you say? We don't know, because we're in the process of making it and creating it. But I think what it actually means is to equip the arts and cultural sector around Europe, basically, because it is a Creative Europe funded project. But what we kind of try to do is also to equip everybody with sort of, tools, as in processes as well. And maybe also to inspire each other, how we can all together kind of figure out the way to go. So obviously, yes, we need those, but we also need to kind of get together, all together, and think about what sort of futures we actually want to go create. The partner location here, because I think it is really important also to mention that we're not doing this all alone, obviously. So we have partners all across Europe as well, and different other topics as well, right? So each of the partners have a different challenge to face. Mm-hmm. In Portugal, it is a permaculture farm. By the way, I really do recommend you check Quinta and they do host also residencies as well, where you can go for a few weeks time to explore permaculture in the middle of eucalyptus monocultures. Then we have Uxana Moreira Foundation in Galicia, where it's a very, very rural environment, and Uxana Moreira as sort of Galician eco-poet. So they explore poetry and literature. In Armenia, we were very much discussing textile and memory and bioregional, basically bioregionalism, right? What it means in contemporary Armenia, in the midst of the sort of upheaval, the changes, and obviously huge deforestation. If you ask what Armenia is going on in terms of rural. In Budapest, we have a partner who is specialist in participatory design, future commons, urban ecologies, and Sonic Tomorrow, our Berlin, our German partner, explores political activism and also sort of sound ecologies as well. So here we are in in Prague last year, we had a small symposium where I met Bada as well, and the host of other people who were sort of engaging with these topics and with the knowledge of plants and with plants and about plants and etc. It was really amazing. These 3 residencies that took place that gathered altogether sort of reunited 20 of artists who are now creating their work inspired by their local context. This is the Portuguese permaculture as well. That is there. Now we're basically in the middle of a series which is taking place online, where we've also invited a host of artists, scientists, traditional knowledge holders, people from all different walks of life. Yes, one of them is unfortunately taking place very, very soon.
Are you recording those?
Yes.
Sessions? So they are online already, some? Or like you do it up?
They're not online because we still haven't worked out where we want to host them.
Okay.
But they will be online, and then very, very probably we will work with these lectures as well as part of sort of different other related materials.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you missed them, yeah, obviously there will be other ways.
So this is like 2027?
No, this is happening now.
Okay.
This is happening now. In Berlin, if you're in Berlin next month. So I warmly welcome or invite you to the symposium that is going to take place at the I never know how to pronounce this Sport Initiative in Neukölln. That's going to explore exactly like the sort of the threshold between fire and silence, how to listen to a planet that is on fire. So lots of exciting guests, films, listening sessions, performances, etc. Yes, the toolkit is about to also, we're making a book that goes also to accompany the toolkit. That's not going to be the only thing, but now we're basically in the process of creating the book. And we would like to launch the book together with the final exhibition that's going to regroup again the 20 artists that were at the residencies last summer. And we did choose a particular place for this, and this was all on purpose because, again, if you go on a random tourist guided tour around Lisbon, you will probably be taken to the memorial with Vasco da Gama and all the others, which has brought a lot to Europe, but I think it has also completely transformed how this world works. So we thought it was pretty symbolic to actually launch the toolkit in Lisbon at the Faculty of Arts, at the Gallery of the Faculty of Arts, where we kind of feel like, yes, of course, we're not going to change the world, right? This is probably impossible, but we do want to propose our own way of looking at plants as well as the sort of plant-human relationships. How can we actually be, how can we build better futures, yes, in order to understand and help shape, and also to champion practices that are already doing lots of things around integrating plants not as decoration or resource, but as agents and collaborators in their practices. It takes time. But yeah, so with this, I thank you. I think this is the end. Thanks for...
So now's the time for Q&As, questions and answers. Wonderful.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, you before, I think it was in the timeline before starting the Haenke project, there was a motivation of there's a lot of staff projects that are interesting, but they stay in academia, and you wanted to do something with it. I think that kind of manifested in the public space installation in Prague, and like maybe in the studio workshops and such.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like if that's moved somewhere, if like this project as well does go outside of like arts and culture or academia spaces, or is it more about like coordinating artist spaces across Europe and like creating these like artist networks?
Yeah.
Maybe, or is it more about the broader public as well?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So with Free Radicals, we are currently trying to like test the temperatures around different fields or different sort of realms and worlds as well. So we all kind of do engage in a host of activities such as educations, or we do lots of workshops already that kind of aim to also address this issue within sort of wider public. People who would not really probably in the first instance, for whom concept of like asking for a consensus, for instance, is something completely new. They have no previous experience with this, and maybe these sort of terms are extremely sort of almost they're not familiar with these terms at all. So I think it is really, really important that we do face this, because again, like as I was mentioning, here maybe we can discuss things within a group of folks who understand this, but at the same time we really need to go out and talk to the sort of majority, to different general audiences as well. I do really think that it is very important also to address I don't want to say elephant in the room, but also very often you talk to architects and designers, people who work already in the creative, who have already creative practice, but who may not kind of see things in the very same way. So I think I do really feel like it is extremely important to kind of gently discuss this also with your peers. The other thing is to talk to the people who are working in science. Very often, at least from my own experience, you have scientists, or let's say people who practitioners of disciplines who could be defined or like put into the sort of Western science knowledge system, who let's say have stayed in a more sort of traditional perception of what Western science is, and how collaboration between different forms of life, but also between Western science and sort of indigenous or traditional and local knowledge should look like, right? So like it is also this work of like explaining that, well, you guys, what you're doing is extremely obviously important, but also if you think of plants as only my material of research, like then I guess like we also need to have a conversation about what plants are for you in terms of research, because very often the sort of Western modern science is not very on the forefront, and from my experience at least, also projects that are rooted in arts and culture are actually way more progressive and way more sort of, out there doing the work that, I wanted to say something.
Yeah. Okay. Have you tried to contact some Czech botanists or conservationists in the field of science? Like in the field of practice, like people from some, not necessarily like environmental NGOs, but people from like the practice of side, like Alexandra Str, or I don't know, some protected areas. Either the management people, like the administrators who are at the same time like biologists, or in like
not in Czech.
You haven't tried, or you weren't successful.
We didn't really get to work on a project that would address this within Czech context. We are in touch with a lot of people from the sort of field of ethnobotany as such, like internationally.
But not in Czech.
But not in Czech.
Because like, is there any ethnobotany as a field in Czech?
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
But again, I guess it's just there is, well, at least at the University of Life Sciences in Prague, there is a laboratory of ethnobotany and ethnopharmacology. So it exists, but obviously, yes, I guess.
And like this department of ethnobotany, is it in their sense, is ethnobotany understood primarily as ethnopharmacology, or does it also, is it interested in like the other cultural uses of plants, or like uses? And
I understand it. I don't understand it. Yeah. No, I think it is very much. It's very much also a social science practice. So it's not just like analyzing like chemical analysis of plants, but it's also, how do you actually work with different cultures across the world, knowing that all this has been also happening. So there is a whole kind of set of protocols that have been already put into practice, for the, let's say, since past 15 years at least. You have the Nagoya Protocol, you have all different sorts of international concepts that should, in theory, in practice, I think it's something different, but I guess it's always like that. But in theory, they should underpin how to work, how to work between, let's say, majoritarily Western lab, scientific lab, and local / indigenous / traditional knowledge practitioners should look like. Who gets the access to the benefit that are potentially produced between these two? Am I making sense?
Yeah, what came to my mind is in general gatekeeping of the knowledge of plants that could be good for your health, but also good for the health of the soil and for the whole biodiversity. So I want to ask if you or your collective had considered some open source know-how or sharing of the tools that could help biodiversity, or gardening outside your garden, or open source ecology, for example, is a big website that shares these tools, or tools for engineering that could be decorporated. So this, I think, would help the wider public being great connection also, and not being dependent with pharmaceutical corporations and stuff, also being close to nature.
Well, we hope to do this with the toolkit. we hope to do an online platform that is going to also regroup all these.
So this would be free.
Yeah. I think it's also an obligation to create something that is open source and that is free to access for everyone. First of all, it's European funds, so I can't just do whatever we want or capitalize on that. But I think it's exactly as you were mentioning. It is really important to create spaces, and not just free radicals, right? There are other spaces as well that already exist, that people can access this knowledge. But it is also, I guess, also creating knowledge which is somehow, I think, for us, the topic has been always sort of on the verge of yes, we need more nature, but also we need to understand that, going for the sake of living more healthily, I think for instance, plants, unless you isolate the molecules and create an actual medicine out of it, they're not going to cure cancer, right? But so there is always this sort of friction or tension between what sort of the modern world requires or needs or invites us, presents to us, the challenges that it presents, but also the need to create access for the knowledge that is somehow evidence-based, as I was mentioning. And I just wanted to mention with the plants that are used for women's health. For instance, when the U.S. Supreme Court thing happened with abortions in the U.S., I think there's an article on Dazed or somewhere which kind of really beautifully described the situation. All of a sudden you could see TikToks and some like small posts basically saying, oh, if you want to keep your child, don't drink this plant. Yes. So there's a whole lot of like, you know, also human creativity to stir attention in, I think, you know, but also like, yes, it's just extremely political topic.
Exactly, yeah.
So yes to open source spaces, of course.
Mm.
Oops.
And how would you approach people who are like totally out of it? Because like, as you said, like all the people in this room are like, you know, already know what you're talking about, but how would you address someone totally external to this? Like, how do you usually approach people in science, for example?
I think that depends because they already know the plants. I guess just the approach is different. So it is something very pragmatic and almost utilitarian. Very often, I don't also want to like claim that all of the scientists are like that. Obviously, they're not. We're helping to co-organize this event in Montpellier, which is like the Society for Ethnobotany annual meeting. And there is, loads of contributions to that meeting that are very, very beautiful and that have absolutely got the sort of today's way of thinking. But then there are obviously other, I think, ways of approaching science that kind of have stayed still in the sort of extractivist logic. I think, yes, we do have like a set of little games and little sort of icebreakers and different other things that again are going to be part of the toolkit as well, because that's what we're trying to test right now and also somehow put sort of organize as well so that it's not something chaotic. We're doing like survey as well, like we're mapping what the mostly European arts and culture sector actually knows, and where is the perception? Who talks to plants? Who doesn't? So that we have some data as well about like who we're actually talking to. But I guess it also very varies, right? So like sometimes I get a group of folks like you. Sometimes I happen to be in a room discussing this topic with people who, don't really haven't had a chance to kind of discover this topic at all. And then I guess it's just also about like, just like creating. I don't know. I think it's also trying to figure out and pinpoint what you share, and then kind of building up on that.
It's just enters my mind that like if you look at the social bubble, so like the social works of, like, for example, the Czech Union of Allotment Gardeners. Okay, one huge group of people who deal with plants, or like časopis Zahrádkář, which is now much more open to like ideas of permaculture up to a point, and like this kind of organic gardening and sustainable gardening, and then so it's one group of people. And then like totally different group of people, like from like the Czech Union of Nature Conservation, ČSOP, and the branches, and the environmentalists who might be like also open to this kind of I don't know if they would be open to interdisciplinarity to such an extent. I think it would depend on like each individual branch. But I think it might be really fascinating to, and I'm not giving you a task, right? But as you're talking about this, I'm just thinking like, yeah, maybe plants are like the not the gardens, not the like protected areas, or like you know, these natural not shelters, like natural park reserves, these things that people from the Czech Union of Nature Conservation care for. They're all volunteers, most of them. But like the plant itself as this kind of bridging element, that could be something really fascinating to work on.
Yeah, definitely.
I have another question. So, you're gonna create a toolkit. You're translating between different groups of people, between science, critical theory, and different groups of interest. Let's call them. Well, that's like a very formal term. But I wonder, like, if you also want to create theory as part of your project, do you want to create knowledge yourself, and what would it be? Because I thought about it because I really love your inspirations, and I also am inspired by these people that you showed us, but it's a very Anglo-Saxon kind of group of scholars, and I wonder, like, and then you have your name of the group, it's from Testados Haenke, right, who's like, he's an ambiguous person, but do you think of like a knowledge creation as an important part of this project, so that, like, you know, it's a bit of change in the usual list of names?
Yeah, definitely. But I don't know. I don't see necessarily ourselves as the producers. Maybe more so like the sort of
gatherers.
Yeah, the gatherers, and the mediator. Like, okay, so like here is somebody who's really interesting and important, and who we believe that kind of deserves to be kind of put on the very same slide. You know what I mean? So it's obviously not yet ready, but I do think about this a lot, and I think ultimately it's also what I would really like to achieve is not obviously, you know, just sort of contribute to shifting the perception, but also ultimately I think that this project is also about basically figuring how not to be idiots as humans, you know, how to treat each other as well in a sort of much more empathic way as well. And yeah, how, if we're talking about livable worlds, also how to create spaces that we all kind of can accommodate each other, I would say. And maybe bridge differences, but also I think also one thing that is very important is that a lot of that plant discourse, you know, obviously if you kind of transpose it to the discourse that is currently happening, you know, you get a completely different level of how you can look at words being used, and I think that is also something that's really important to. It can be also put in parallel, right? Like you cannot impede a Japanese knotweed to travel or to spread its roots simply because, you know, you cannot. Just like, So I think as much as this is also about co-conspiring or collaborating with plants, it's also about how we can kind of collaborate with each other.
Maybe I have also a question. How do you choose your kind of partners? It's mean the residencies. So if it's because I think it's a bit connect maybe also with another question that it's about the when you talk about the indigenous knowledge, if through your program you try to also, in a way, and through this residency, bring the local knowledge of the places.
Yes.
So why you choose that concrete European area and then Armenia? And
well, the choice of partners actually was, I think it was more like a sort of, we had this project in mind for many years, and then somehow, we just got talking to these people, and we've somehow figured out that this would be the way to go. But also, I think, yes, with respect to what you were mentioning, lots of, like every single one of them, yes, obviously it is rooted even very much like sort of, yes, like European contexts. Each of them do have like their different type of challenge that they're facing. But also lots of the choice, obviously, the choice of, for instance, like the people that we invite to be part of the project, not only for like as the partners, but also, to intervene as part of the talks, or people who are the residents, like these are all, I think, and again, obviously you have one thing is the artistic merit, and another thing is like their sort of lived experience as well, being for, also, not all of them, but obviously, being part of our sort of European shared histories, not having the sort of typical European white background. So I think this is very also important for us to, obviously, a European project per se is, it can be many things, but in our case, it's also inviting the voices that are somehow, at least we think, not heard very often in this kind of discourse as well. What can a Peruvian gardener tell us about growing milpa in Switzerland, for instance? Yeah, so that's that.
I think it's always like super interesting to see like what in a particular climate, like if there is still some residue of traditional knowledge of like dealing with plants, because like on the one hand, transposing the knowledge from Peru is super interesting, but how can I practice it here in my garden?
Yeah.
I mean, like theoretically, it might be like totally
and
fascinating.
First of all, how not to practice cultural appropriation, and how also not to repeat the very same pattern that Galerie does here as well in the first place. We need to. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.